So welcome to the See You Try show. We are really, really fortunate that I have two people from our Here For You mental health network with us. I have Meghan Gentry and James Warren, and maybe we'll have a couple more people who will join us. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a minute. And first, I'm going to just do a little commercial around reminding you that the views and opinions of the people who participate on the show are theirs. And so I want them to speak as openly and transparently as possible. The other thing that I want to do is remind you a little bit. We put it in the announcement that the purpose of this show, particularly this month's show, this episode show was generated by James. So I'm going to actually put him on the spot. So about almost a year ago, would you say, James, Tracy Parsons and the city of Champaign came to us and said, hey, what we're noticing is at funerals and at community events, we don't see enough mental health support for youth and families in our community. And he said, the charge, right, Meghan and James, was, what would it be like for us to create something, to have resources that would be available in community spaces and places of people who were comforting and welcoming, who could provide some mental health support. And Here For You was developed, and we have basically spent probably the past year refining, tweaking, and they're going to say a whole bunch more about what that process came from, but it was really about trying to come up with a response to the community's needs around sort of being trauma informed and making sure that mental health supports existed for youth and their families. So, but James, after having trudged along for a year, said we started some great groups, and again, all of this conversation will happen. James said, people should probably know we exist. And I was like, probably that would be a good idea. And he said, you have a show. And I said, yes, I do. And so Exhibit A, so we have two representatives. And again, I hope more people will come. And this month is especially important to talk about mental health and introduce our Here For You network. Many people don't know that this month is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and I will also tell you that the Human Rights Commission has asked us to rebrand that as Black, Indigenous People, and People of Color Mental Health Awareness Month. I want to do a little bit of a blurb about why that's so important. You might not know that there was a really famous African-American writer. Her name was Bebe Moore Campbell. She wrote for the Washington Post, the New York Times, and a whole bunch of other things. Her big work of fiction, she had several books of fiction, but one of them was called The 72-Hour Hold, that was written about her daughter's fictionalized version of her daughter's struggle with bipolar disorder, and just what it was like from a parent's perspective to engage in that struggle. And she was aware that there was so much stigma. So I'm going to actually read a quote. So I'm going to be looking down, and she said, once my loved one accepted the diagnosis, healing began for the entire family. But it took too long. It took years. Can't we as a nation begin to speed up that process? We need a national campaign to destigmatize mental illness, especially one targeted at African Americans. It is shameful. It is not shameful to have a mental illness or a mental health need. Get treatment and recovery as possible. And I think that is so compelling. Her daughter, for a lot of folks, was popular. She was on several talk shows. Her name is Maya Campbell, and she was on Ayana Fix My Life most recently, but she was on a TV show called In the House and South Central, and a lot of struggles. And her journey towards mental health recovery was public because she also had a substance abuse need, which coincided with her mental health need, which we see all too often, and sometimes we miss it. And I think of Bebe Moore Campbell, who declared this, who worked with Congress to declare this Mental Health Awareness Month in 2008 before she died of brain cancer. She would be so probably on the trauma-informed care bandwagon because she saw how everything interconnected. So with that commercial and that little bit of history, I'm going to put my papers down and let Meghan and James introduce themselves. And it doesn't matter which ones of you go first.
Well, ladies first.
Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm Meghan Gentry. I'm a school social worker in the community, and have worked with teenagers for a long time, probably at least the last 12 years, and in different capacities. And I'm also a foster parent, and usually have teens. And so, mental health needs are kind of across the board part of my life in a lot of areas. And, so joining Here For You, I saw, the call for social workers and mental health workers in the community to come together and, support our youth. There's so many needs, and we can all, help in some way. And that's really a passion of mine. So I've just really enjoyed getting to know everybody on the team and getting this off the ground. It's really exciting to think about where this could go and how this could help our community and our families. And besides that, Karen said to share other things besides work things, and I'm having trouble thinking of things outside of work type of things. But I do like arts and crafts and reading and my 2 kitty cats. So and I have a new love of walking since all of this, quarantine, COVID stuff. To be able to get outside and walk, I have realized is really a huge blessing. So
Yeah.
We
have to plan a walk.
Yeah.
All right, James.
Yeah, so my name is James Warren Jr., and I guess I will give my background in the sense of a question that I often ask people when I am interviewing different people for mental health positions. I'll ask people, why in the world would you want to be involved with mental health? And my answer to that question is, one of the things I believe is that God gives everybody different gifts. And as far back as I can remember, even as a little kid, I was the person that people would come up to and just start talking, and specifically start talking about different problems or issues that they had, and just had the ability to sit and listen and provide them with advice and things like that. And as far as getting into mental health, my junior year of high school, my favorite teacher, Mr. Sampson, whatever Mr. Sampson taught, I took it. And he taught a intro to psychology class, and had no idea what psychology was, but since Mr. Sampson was teaching it, I said I would take it. And I'll never forget the first day of the class when he explained what psychology was and explained that people actually have professions where they talk to people and provide them with counsel. And I said, that's it. Like, that's what I want to do.
You're like, people get paid for that?
literally, that's exactly what I said. And he was nice enough to reach out to a couple authors of the textbook we were using and ask them some suggestions on how to turn that into a profession. And they suggested, a good school would be the University of Illinois, and came here and did undergrad and grad school, and have been working in a variety of different mental health agencies ever since. And specifically, Karen and I, we go back several years through working in different mental health agencies. But the idea of Here For You again came up from, the traditional way of people receiving mental health services by going to organization, or, I'm also involved at the Juvenile Detention Center. So a lot of times, specifically in the minority community, mental health doesn't become a subject until after something bad has happened. And so we were having conversations about, hey, we have so many people in our community who not only have professions where they can provide mental health support, but this is what they do on a daily basis in regards to their communities, relationships they have, and things like that. And so the passion for Here For You was, going to all these different organized events and things like that, but then seeing that there were so many people who we were looking to support who would not come to those events. And so Karen, you and I had a conversation with some other community members to say, hey, what if we start thinking outside the box? Instead of doing things that are convenient for us as professionals, what if we got professionals and other community members to say, hey, let's look at what's convenient for the populations that we're looking to serve, and stop having meetings and instead look for ways that we can go meet people where they're at and provide them with support based on what they need, based on what they tell us they need, and also based on building those relationships as well.
Yeah. Wow. And we have another member who joined us. And so I'm hoping Shantel will get settled in and introduce herself. And you're going to have to unmute yourself. You're like, oh my God, it's all real, live in Technicolor.
Can you hear me okay? I'm in my car. So
yes, we can. Weird. And so you can tell, like, this is who we are. Like, we are multitasking people. Introduce yourself, Shantel.
Hi, I'm Shantel Pettigrew. I'm in my car. I work for DCFS. I'm an investigator, so I'm going from one home to another, but I wanted to dial in really quick and be involved in the conversation. So that's me. What else would you like for me to share?
Anything interesting and relevant, like what else, like maybe what got you involved, or share anything that you'd like. We're just sort of doing introductions.
I think what got me involved is I'm born and raised from the Champaign-Urbana area, and I think my personal testimony, the things that I've been through, have gotten me involved in just having a heart for our youth, because we do have a community of lost youth. And so I feel like, based off my personal experience, whether it be like personal or work, I feel like I have something to contribute to the lives of the families in the surrounding area and to the children that live in our area as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to read off the list of other folks who might pop in. So just, this could be like the popcorn of things, just so, and I asked James to remind me. So we have Latricia Johnson, who is known in the community, who's been involved in our work, Gabrielle Smith, Dante Lutz, Tiza Hibbler, and I think, did I get everybody? Yes. Oh, and Heather Rose, she would kill me for forgetting. And then one of the original people who was involved with us that we hope, who's in Rantoul, we hope to re-engage, is Ava Collins, who did some art projects out in the park early on when we first started. So depth and breadth and exciting, and you will hear from everybody that they are passionate about their community. Megan, do you want to share a little bit about what got you? I know you've mentioned, sort of your love of teens. Do you want to share anything else about what got you involved?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is working in the schools. You see that you can only do so much. And, there's so many, youth are pulled in so many directions. And of course, schools are meant for the education, academics is a big focus, but just seeing so many youth struggle with some of the traditional learning things, and just not feeling like we can get a grasp all the time on what's really going on and how to best support our youth. So I thought this was just such an interesting concept, because it focuses on the community piece and wrapping around youth and getting to know their families and going to them rather than waiting for them to come to us, as James said, as traditional mental health providers do. And, it's an opportunity to see teens and young adults in different situations where we're saying, we're here for you, which is where the name came from. And we want to provide support in the good and the not so good and the struggles and the celebrations. How can we support? And I know that it's interesting, because in this group, I'm the white girl.
Oh my gosh, we never noticed.
I just thought it was maybe the lighting. I thought it was the lighting or something.
Y'all are silly.
It's such a privilege to be in this role, because it really gives an opportunity for me to listen and hear voices of the BIPOC community and their needs, and think about how, I can support that rather than being like the head, like, this is how we're going to run things. That's really important here. So, I just love our kids here and love being able to see them out at the park, and, they're yelling out their cars or driving by, as I'm going in the store and all of that. So, just to be a part of the community is amazing.
Well, and if I can maybe brag on everybody a little bit, it was interesting, just the process that Karen and I went through when we first began discussing what eventually would become Here For You. Again, the idea of bringing in people from the community who, number one, had the expertise to provide this type of support for the community. But over time, what we realized is that the real thing that we were looking for this specific group is not necessarily what do people have on paper. That stuff has a place, right? But what are in people's hearts? And so I can, brag on Meghan, I can brag on Shantel, I can brag on Tisha, and saying, like, these are people who, this is work that they were already doing in the community. These were relationships that they were already building. They were investing into young people's lives. And now it's just a matter of saying, okay, well, let's try to get a concentrated effort together where we have people who are already doing this work, who are now just a little more focused, and then hopefully can expand and grow and be in these spaces to show the world and this local community that this support is actually available.
Wow. I can't say enough. I mean, it is a powerful group of people. The other thing that we hope for, right, is that we know that the work is hard. And so we hope to provide a little bit of support to help, right, like make it sustainable so that we reduce burnout and increase collaboration and just sort of create a web of people who can hold hearts. So I'm going to take us one step back, though, because you all mentioned this. Doing this work is hard. It can be complicated. It has been hard to get folks engaged. And so talk about some of the stigma or some of the barriers to involvement that you've seen or experienced. And then maybe we can throw in, like, what do you hope we can offer, what you can do to address some of those barriers? But what are some of the barriers that you've seen? And
well, I would say anytime we're dealing with mental health, one of the biggest barriers is always going to be stigma. People hear about counseling, people hear about even social work and things like that. And, there's all kinds of phrases and words that get thrown out. Oftentimes in counseling sessions, whenever I'm working with a new client professionally, I'll ask them, hey, what are you expecting from counseling? And I'll specifically say, like, hey, what have you seen in movies? What have you seen on TV? Tell me what you're coming in thinking this is going to look like, often so I can then tell you, hey, it's not going to look anything like that. And then specifically within the minority community, just personal experience, a lot of times, and one of the biggest places I saw this pop up is when I've spent time working in schools. When a mental health professional shows up to provide support for a student, the first thing everybody thinks is, who's in trouble? Right. And so even this idea of, again, that there should have to be a problem, and a lot of times there has to be, unfortunately, some type of tragedy before we begin to think of getting mental health support, when in reality, what we're trying to encourage people to realize is, number one, we all have things that we're going through. And also we all have a variety of supports that we can utilize to help us work through those things. And we just want to spread the word that mental health support is one of those options on that spectrum of supports that people can receive.
yeah, I love it. Other thoughts?
One thing that I was thinking, I think it's obvious that when a tragedy happens, youth and families, young ones, older people, everybody's suffering in that moment. And I think what is hard is sometimes one of the barriers is that there's the tendency to want to just, okay, you had your grieving time, let's move on. And that doesn't always happen. And so when we're talking about youth who've been impacted by community violence, there's so many things that bring back those same, initial feelings of when the tragedy happened.
Yeah.
That, it can happen a year from now, you're triggered, and that word is like so overused, but it brings out that those same feelings and thoughts and the body symptoms that you had when that first tragedy first happened. And so sometimes when I'll contact families and say, you know, I'm really concerned about your student, we're still seeing, you know, X, Y, and Z, there can be the reaction, which I understand, of that happened a year ago, or that happened
6 months ago.
We gotta move past it. We gotta keep going. And I think that just shows the tendency to want to just be resilient and bounce back and let's go and move forward. But Karen and I were working with a young woman, and I remember her saying, we're trying to prevent, by putting in the supports right now, prevent like PTSD from manifesting over time. And so when you get those supports in place right away, and you know, that is always going to prevent, you know, PTSD symptoms from kind of coming up and manifesting, but it can help for sure. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no. So let's move there. So a lot of stigma. What would you tell somebody, right, who was thinking about reaching out, thinking about a mom, a youth, a cousin, whatever, that was thinking about reaching out? What would you tell them about what to look for? How do you guys answer that question? Like, why take the plunge? What can they expect? And then we'll go back to talking about what is it that you can offer. But what do you tell people? So imagine that somebody's really like gonna take the plunge and pick up the phone. What should they ask for?
Well, so one of the things that I encourage people to realize when it comes to getting, you know, mental health support, it is different than maybe certain other services you might receive. You know, if you're hungry, you realize that, hey, there's only so many restaurants I can go to, right? Or, but, you know, or even, you know, maybe if you need an electrician or something like that, there's only so many electricians you can choose from. Whereas with mental health support, you know, a lot of times you're going to be building some type of intimate relationship with the people who are providing you with that support. And we may not get to pick our family, right? Because, you know, those are intimate relationships, but we do get to pick our counselors. We do get to pick the mental health support people that provide us with that service. So I encourage people to be willing to, number one, take some time to think about what you actually want, whether it be experience, whether it be even cultural similarities, or sometimes maybe even cultural differences, availability, things like that, and take some time to talk to people and search out what options you have. And then when you actually start exploring some of those options and start connecting with those service providers, be open and be honest. And don't be afraid to say, you know, hey, I'm trusting you with something very important in regards to my mental health. So, you know, I'm going to be asking questions and, in a sense, trying to feel you out to see whether or not you're the appropriate person to provide me with the support that I'm looking for. And then if that person isn't, do not be afraid to say, you know, hey, thank you, but no thank you, and then look elsewhere.
Yeah, I see it as a job interview, right? It should be a job interview with all of those, like, I'm hiring you to walk with me in this very intimate journey, and either you are the right one or not, you know, but I don't think that anybody should subject themselves to, right, like a therapist that isn't a good fit. I'm going to open it up to Meghan and Shantel. The other piece, though, I'm not sure if you guys experience this, is if somebody had a bad therapist, then they're like, I once went to a therapist and it was a bad therapist. And I was like, in what situation do we go, I once bought a shirt and it was ugly, and so I stopped buying shirts, right? Like, but with a therapist, somehow we decide, like, you get one go, and if it doesn't fit correctly, we're done. So Meghan, Shantel, do you have anything else? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but like, I had a bad therapist once and no more.
Oh, go ahead, Shantel.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Even not just therapists, but just like even encountering people who they've had mental health people, like social workers in schools or counselors in schools, have had a bad interaction in that way, or you know, they sent me to the social worker because I said XYZ, and now, you know, here I am, you know, and it's like, oh, sorry. But I think it's all about being looking for somebody that you feel like you can trust. So it's, you know, I think it has to build slowly over time. And James had some really, really great points. I think that also remembering that there are therapists and counselors, mental health professionals in town who have different specialties, and some who may work more with adults and like grief, where some may work more with, you know, the foster system, or some may work more with ADHD type symptoms. And of course, you can find people who work with a bunch of things, but there's also things like play therapy for kids. And we definitely don't have enough play therapists in town who are trained to do that work. But, you know, their kids, even before they can talk, sometimes experience trauma or really scary things. And when they don't have the words and the vocabulary to be able to express how they're really feeling internally, play therapy, art therapy, you know, getting up and dancing, moving the body around, all of those kind of expressive therapies can be really, really helpful. And that's kind of a non-traditional way of looking at it, where you're not just, you know, having to sit down and talk about your deepest, darkest things. You can think about it as, I'm going to do, you know, some different activities to just help me process. And when I'm ready to talk, I'm ready to talk. So I don't know, I think for parents or for young adults and youth who are looking for that, you know, thinking about what your interests are, and sometimes you can find therapists who can tap into those things.
Perfect. So Shantel, you were going to say?
I would agree with what, sorry, it's probably echoing now, moving all over the place, but I would agree with what everybody has said thus far. But I think it's also important to make sure the lines of communication is always open. And I think that ties into the family and the people we're dealing with being able to trust us. Once we, you know, they feel like they can confide in us, and we understand where they're coming from and they understand where we come from as service providers, I think that plays a huge role in how successful the treatment being provided to them can be.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know we got a question that came in that was sort of similar related, because before we start talking about Here for You and how you guys approach your work, I do want to make time and space for the question that came in, which I think is more closely aligned to this dialogue. Am I right, James?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right. Do you want me to go ahead and read it verbatim?
Yeah. So we had a question in advance, so you guys can pepper our messages in advance if you have them.
Okay. So we received a message from a gentleman, and his question/statement is, the unfair treatment of, quote, non-whites has two serious problems. One is constantly discussed with passion for hundreds of years: race, skin color. Skin color, the other is connected but sort of separate from race: cultural differences. Many prejudices are based on cultural behaviors and values. I'd be very glad to discuss this on Friday. So it sounds like the question is the role of race and skin color versus just general cultural differences.